My brother answered the door of my condo, wearing my housecoat. Not his, mine. The one I bought at Winners 2 Christmases ago, the gray waffle knit one with the fraying left pocket that I kept meaning to sew. He was standing in the doorway of the unit I had owned for 3 years, holding a mug that I recognized as mine too, the ceramic one my best friend brought back from a trip to Portugal, and he looked at me like I was the one who'd shown up uninvited. "We need to talk," he said. I had 2 suitcases with me. I'd been in Vancouver for a work trip 11 days, and I'd come home to find the locks on my door changed and my brother in my housecoat drinking coffee from my mug at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning. "Excuse me?" I said. He sighed. Actually sighed, like I was exhausting him. "Come in, okay, we'll explain. We." I didn't know what "we" meant yet. I found out 30 seconds later when I walked into my own living room and saw my parents sitting on my couch with my sister between them, her hand resting on her very pregnant belly and a look on her face that I can only describe as satisfied. Let me back up, because you need to understand what kind of family I come from before any of the rest of this makes sense. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. My brother is 2 years younger than me. My sister is 5 years younger. Growing up in Mississauga, my parents weren't cruel, exactly. They just had a favorite, and it wasn't me, and it wasn't my brother. Everything in our household organized itself around my sister. Her dance recitals, her tuition, her car at 17, her semester abroad in Florence that my parents paid for while I was putting myself through school at Ryerson on OSAP loans, and a part-time job at a mall food court. I want to be careful here because I'm not interested in making myself sound like a martyr. Plenty of people grow up in families where one kid gets more than the others. It's not unusual. What I'll say is that I noticed it, I made peace with it at some point in my mid-20s, and I built a life that had nothing to do with anyone's approval. I got a job in tech project management. I worked hard. I saved money in a TFSA and a RSP because I started early and I was careful. I bought my condo in Etobicoke when I was 28, a 1-bedroom plus den on the 14th floor, $619,000, which at the time felt like a miracle and in retrospect was just the last affordable window before the market lost its mind entirely. That condo was mine. My name on the deed. My mortgage. My $47,000 down payment that I had saved over 6 years while my sister was in Florence eating gelato. I want you to keep that number in mind, because it matters later. When I walked into my living room that Tuesday and saw my family arranged on my furniture, I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that. I stood there with my carry-on still on my shoulder and I said, very quietly, "Someone needs to explain what's happening right now." My mother spoke first. She has this way of framing things as though she's doing you a favor. This tone she uses, like she's reluctantly sharing information you should already be grateful for. She said that my sister's husband had left her, which I already knew. They'd separated in the spring. And that my sister was 34 weeks pregnant and had nowhere to go. And that my parents had decided as a family that my sister should move into my condo while she got back on her feet. As a family. I had not been consulted. I had been in Vancouver. My father added that they'd arranged to have a locksmith come while I was gone so that my sister would feel settled when she arrived. He said, settled like this was a reasonable word to use about breaking into someone's home. I said, "You changed the locks on my condo." My mother said, "We have a key. We've always had a key." Which was technically true. I'd given them a spare years ago for emergencies. I did not consider my sister needs somewhere to stay to be an emergency. My brother, still in my housecoat, said that it was temporary. That my sister just needed a few months. That I was in a good position financially. He actually used that phrase, good position financially. And that I could easily stay with a friend or sublet somewhere while my sister got sorted. I looked at my sister. She looked back at me with that same expression she'd had when I walked in. Not apologetic, not uncomfortable, satisfied. I said, "I'm going to need everyone to leave so I can change out of my travel clothes." My mother said, "Sweetheart, we should talk about the plan." I said, "Everyone leave. Now." They left. Not my condo. They went into my bedroom. The 4 of them retreated to my bedroom and closed the door. Like, that was a reasonable thing to do. Like I had asked them to step into another room rather than out of my home. Here is where I have to be honest about something. Because the comments on stories like this are always full of people saying, "Just call the police, it's that simple." And I hear that, and those people are not wrong. But in that moment, standing in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my family having moved themselves into my life while I was gone, I did not call the police. I sat down on my own couch and I felt something that I can only describe as a very cold kind of clarity. I called my friend instead. She lived in Leslieville. She said, "Come immediately, bring whatever you need, sleep on the couch as long as necessary." So I changed out of my travel clothes in the bathroom. My sister's toiletries were already arranged on the shelf above my sink, her prenatal vitamins lined up next to my face wash. And I took one more suitcase from the closet, and I left. I want you to understand why I didn't push for immediate removal that night. Part of it, I'll admit, was shock. But the other part was calculation. My sister was 34 weeks pregnant. In Ontario, even in a situation of unlawful entry, removing a pregnant woman in winter is not a simple thing. I knew that. I had a feeling, just a feeling, that if I went in loud and forceful, my family would find a way to make me look unreasonable. They were very good at that. They'd been doing it my whole life. So I left. and I called a lawyer. I found her through a colleague who'd been through a condominium dispute a few years before. Her name was Ms. Brennan, and she had an office in the path, and she did not waste a single word on sympathy. She listened to the facts. She said, "You have documentation that you own this property?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Mortgage in your name alone?" "Yes." "Original keys, do you still have them?" I did. "Good," she said. "Don't give anyone anything. Don't sign anything, and don't discuss this with your family until we've filed." I asked what we were filing. She said we were starting with an application for immediate possession under Ontario's property law, and that she was also going to contact my condo building's management office, because she wanted the security footage from the day the locksmith came. She asked if my parents had a key. I said yes. She said, "We need to establish how access was obtained, and whether the building had any role in this." The building did have a role in this. I found out later that my mother had told the concierge she was dropping off something for me, and had been waved through. Then she'd let the locksmith up without authorization. The concierge on shift that day was not supposed to let anyone into a unit without owner confirmation. He just had. When I found out, I wrote a letter to building management that was, I'll say, very thorough. They offered a formal apology and terminated his employment within the week. But we're getting ahead of things. Ms. Brennan filed the possession application on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my mother was calling me 6 times. I didn't pick up. My father sent a text that said, and I'm reading directly from my phone, "This is not how family behaves. Your sister needs you. You are being incredibly selfish, and one day you will regret this." I screenshotted it. I screenshot everything. That's a habit I'd gotten into years earlier, and it has served me in ways I couldn't have imagined. My brother texted to say that he was staying there too to help with the baby when it came. So now there were 3 people in my 1-bedroom condo. My sister texted me once. Just once. She said, "I don't understand why you're making this so hard. You always do this. You always do this." I read that 4 or 5 times. I still think about it. Here's the part that came out during the legal process that I hadn't known, or hadn't let myself know. My parents had told my sister months before I came home from Vancouver that they had arranged for her to use my place. They had made this plan, my mother and father, with my sister, and none of them had mentioned it to me until I was standing in my own hallway with my suitcase. They hadn't intended to ask me. That was never part of the plan. The plan was to tell me after the fact and rely on the combination of family pressure and my sister's pregnancy to make me comply. When Ms. Brennan presented this to the hearing, with the text messages, the security footage timeline, the locksmith invoice my mother had paid, which my parents had the sheer audacity to charge to a credit card in my father's name, creating a paper trail, and a statement from the concierge outlining what my mother had said when she came in, the magistrate went very still. That stillness. I think about it all the time. The moment when the magistrate looked up from the documents and looked at my family sitting across the room and just went quiet. My brother had brought a folder of his own documents. He had printed out something about family contribution to property, some internet article, I think, not a legal document, and he had written a letter explaining that my sister was vulnerable and that I had sufficient resources to accommodate her needs without hardship. He had actually calculated, in this letter, what percentage of my take-home income the condo mortgage represented, to demonstrate that I could afford to not live there. I'm not making this up. He submitted this to a legal proceeding as though it was relevant. The magistrate did not engage with the letter. What happened next took about 3 weeks in total, which felt like both forever and very fast. The possession order came through. My family had 14 days to vacate. My mother called me crying the night she received the notice. She said she couldn't believe I had done this to my sister. She said my sister was due in 6 weeks. She said I had broken the family. I said, "You broke into my home." She said that wasn't what happened. She said they had a key. I said, "Having a spare key for emergencies doesn't give you the right to change the locks and move someone in. You know that." She hung up. My sister called 2 days before the vacate deadline. She sounded different on the phone, less certain, more tired, the way pregnancy makes everyone eventually. She asked if there was any way we could figure something out. I said I was sorry she was in a hard situation. I said the relationship breakdown with her husband sounded genuinely awful, and I meant that. But I said I could not let her stay in my home without my consent, and that what my parents had done was not something I could treat as normal. She said, "You've never forgiven me for anything." I thought about that for a long time afterward. I'm still thinking about it. The day they moved out, I didn't go to the condo. I waited until the following morning. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor and I stood in the hallway for a moment before I put my key in the door. My key, the original, the one Ms. Brennan had told me to keep. And I walked in, they had cleaned. I'll give them that. The place was tidy. But my sister had rearranged the living room furniture, and there was a different shower curtain in the bathroom, and 3 of my kitchen cabinet knobs were missing. I never figured out why. I still don't know what happened to them, and there was a folded note on the kitchen counter. The note was from my mother. It said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I put it in the folder with everything else. Here is what I need to tell you about the financial piece, because this is the part that still takes my breath away a little when I think about it. A few months earlier, my parents had asked me if they could borrow money. Not a small amount, $22,000. My father was dealing with some tax issues, he said, and he needed it short term, he said, and he would pay it back within the year, he said. I had transferred the money from my TFSA because I trusted him. I had no documentation, no loan agreement, nothing in writing. Just an e-transfer with the memo line, Loan Dad. During the legal process, Ms. Brennan flagged this. She said, "You know you're unlikely to see that back." I told her about the e-transfer record. She got quiet in the way she got quiet when she was thinking. Then she said that if my father's tax issues were serious enough, there might be Sierra involvement, and that if there were any formal proceedings around his finances, our loan documentation, thin as it was, might matter. 3 months after my family vacated my condo, my father's accountant contacted him about an audit. I don't know the details of what the CRA found, because it wasn't my business and I didn't ask. What I know is that my father called me in February and told me he was working through some things, and that he would repay the $22,000 as soon as possible. He has not repaid it. I don't expect he will. But here's the thing, I'm okay with that, in a way I didn't expect to be. I mean, I'm not okay with losing $22,000. That's not nothing. But the process of going through everything, the legal filing, the documentation, the sitting across from a magistrate while my brother presented a printout of an internet article about family property rights, something clarified for me that I hadn't been able to see before. My family had never seen me as a person with my own life. I was a resource. I was a position on a balance sheet that could be redistributed when someone more important needed it. The condo wasn't mine to them. The $22,000 wasn't mine to them. The 11 years of careful saving and early mornings and skipped vacations that built that life, none of it was mine to them. It was inventory. It was available. And when I stopped being available, they called it cruelty. My sister had her baby in March. I know because my brother texted me a photo. No message, just the photo. A little girl. She has my sister's nose. I saved the photo and I didn't reply. I've had people ask me if I regret how I handled it. If I should have let my sister stay, just for a few months, just to keep the peace, just because she was pregnant and alone and my family was falling apart. I understand why people ask that. It's a reasonable question. Here's what I tell them. There was no version of letting her stay that was mine to choose. That's the part people miss. The choice had already been made for me. My parents had already moved my sister in. They had already changed my locks. They had already decided what my life would look like and in what ways my resources would be used and in whose service. The question was never whether to help my sister. The question was whether I would let my family override my right to be consulted about my own home. If I had said nothing, if I had moved into my friend's living room indefinitely and paid my mortgage and never filed anything, what would that have taught anyone? That it worked. That all you had to do was present me with a fait accompli, and I would absorb it, the way I'd always absorbed things, because that was my role. I wasn't willing to be that person anymore. The last time I spoke to my mother was in May. She called to tell me my father was doing better, health-wise. He'd had some stress-related issues over the winter, and to let me know that my sister and the baby were settled in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, subsidized housing, and that things were stabilizing. She said this like she was giving me an update on a situation I'd caused. She said she hoped we could move forward as a family. I said I hoped my father felt better. I meant it. I said I was glad my sister had somewhere to live. I meant that too. And then I said that I needed some time, and I wasn't sure how much, and I would reach out when I was ready. I haven't reached out yet. I kept the condo. I put the furniture back the way it was. I found a new shower curtain, nicer than the old one, actually, a deep eucalyptus green that makes the whole bathroom feel different, feel like mine in a way it almost hasn't since I moved in. I replaced the kitchen cabinet knobs. I bought myself a new housecoat, charcoal this time, heavier, the kind that stays warm without needing a radiator. Some mornings I stand at my kitchen window with my coffee and I look at the city, and I think about the girl who saved $47,000 over 6 years while working a food court job and going to school full-time, who bought this view for herself with no one's help and no one's permission. And I think she deserved better than what she got from those people. And I think she got it anyway.